ICQ Podcast, episode 464, Q&A Plus. Well, hello fellow amateur radio enthusiasts, and welcome to this episode 464 of the ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast. Supported this episode by Simon Wilton, Golf 7, Hotel Charlie Delta, and of course our monthly and subscription donors. In this episode we join Martin M1MRB, Dan Kilo 6 November Uniform, Caryn KD2 Golf Uniform Tango, Edmund Mike 0 Mike November Golf, and Ed DD5 Lima Papa to discuss the latest amateur radio news. Myself, Colin M6BLY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is a Q&A Plus. Well, as always, we're very grateful to our very kind donors. The monthly subscription donors help us pay our way, and also for the one-off donors that keep your show advert-free and help us to pay our way and publish your show for every fortnight. We'd like to thank Simon Wilton, Golf 7 Hotel Charlie Delta, who sent 2 lots of birthday donations because he wants to keep the ICQ podcast going for at least another 17 years. Keep up the very enjoyable work. So thanks lots, Simon, and your donation is greatly appreciated by ourselves. If you find value from today's show and you want to keep your ICQ podcast published every fortnight and advert-free, we ask for a very simple concept. It's called value for value. If you find value in what we do, turn that into a monetary figure that's of value to you. Go to our webpage, ICQPodcast.com/donate, and then send that donation to us. All proceeds go to the walls helping the running costs of the show. Right, well now let's carry on with the show and generate that value for you by joining Martin, Dan, Caryn, Edmund and Ed to discuss and generate thoughts about the latest amateur radio news, including Hurricane Watch Net marks 60 years and ham radio for national preparedness. As always, hope you enjoy.
So hi guys, and welcome to the ICQ Podcast News Roundtable for episode 464. Tonight, I'm joined by Dan Romanchik KB6NU. Hi, Dan.
Good evening, everyone. Sorry, I was just listening to the previous episode, and I had to do that.
You did. What you obviously heard was that if Bill hadn't turned up, they were going to do an impersonation of Bill instead of Leslie. But there you go. There it is. We that's the good fun about this. We do have fun when we do these. Also, your side of the pond, we have Caryn Eve Murray. Hi, Caryn.
A very happy 464 to everybody, to the listeners and my fellow presenters.
Yeah, and your call sign is KD2GUT. Just, I forgot to mention it.
It is for the foreseeable future, yes.
Yeah. Right. If I move back to the UK very quickly, Mr. Edmund Spicer is down on the south coast of England, M0MNG. Hi, Edmund.
Hello, Martin. Hello, everybody.
Yeah, good to have you. And we've been busy last few weeks, and we're busy again this weekend, but more about that later. And over there in Germany, we have our Mr. Ed Durrant DD5LP. Hi, Ed.
What do you mean you're Mr. Ed Durrant? Is there more than one? Woof, woof. Oh, no, that's not right. Yeah. Hi, everybody, and looking forward to the show again.
Yeah. No, I don't own you, Ed. You're all right. I'm not trying to take over. But no, we do have fun, and sometimes my brain doesn't work as it ought to. Put it that way. Okay, first news story, which I think we'll run 2 or 3 news stories together because they're very, very similar, but we'll maybe discuss about it. But in the States, Hurricane Watch Net marks 60 years of service. Now, 60 years of hurricane watching, to me, is pretty damn good. You know, it's something that people must appreciate. Dan, do you want to go first on this one?
Sure. You know, these folks are really dedicated, and that's the thing that I think stands out. And they've been able to, obviously it's lasted 60 years, recruit new people into the hurricane watch business. And, people maybe in other parts of the world aren't quite so sensitive to it as we are here in the U.S., but these hurricanes, pummel the eastern coast of the U.S. every year, and that's where this Hurricane Watch Net comes in.
Yeah, it certainly does, Dan. And as I say, you guys get some horrible weather at times. Although we have had tornadoes in London, but it's not a regular occurrence. And hurricanes, I think we do get them on our coastal region, but you seem to get a lot more than the rest of us. Caryn, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, I'm speaking to you from Hurricane Central. I'm here on the east coast of the United States, so we very much appreciate the Hurricane Watch Net. These are life-saving efforts for sure. Yeah, it's important to keep situational awareness and reports, and especially now that less and less information can be expected from the government. It is these volunteers who carry life-saving traffic. This we just had Labor Day here in the United States, and Labor Day is remembered by weather watchers as a big storm, Hurricane Betsy. And that's really the origins of how operators were passing traffic and what became evident as a need. So it's important to know for younger amateurs who think there's always been a hurricane watch net. Well, in their lifetime, that's true, but for people 60 and above, they see it as something that evolved over time. This is a magnificent network of hardworking people who really go the distance to get information out there. So happy 60th to the Hurricane Watch Net.
Yeah, it's certainly a happy 60th to him. Now, Edmund, you live on the south coast of England, down there by the coast. I mean, occasionally I assume you get some really bad weather, but does it actually make hurricane standard?
No, I don't think so. Even the Great Storm of October 1987, which people often refer to as a hurricane, I think technically wasn't one. It was hurricane force winds rather than being a hurricane as such. But yeah, congratulations to making it to 60 years. 60 years of anything is one heck of an achievement. And it may be possible in the UK to actually hear some of these transmissions over the air, because on the 20 metre band, for those listeners who are perhaps not quite so familiar with the HF bands, the top 50 kilohertz tends to be relatively quiet compared to, say, between 14200 and 14300. So 14.325 megahertz could well be clear channel to listen to in the UK. The 40 meter frequency could be a bit more difficult, 7.268. In Europe, that falls in the 41 meter broadcast band, and I think it's quite close to a spot frequency that's used by China Radio International, so that frequency could be a bit more difficult to hear, but all things are possible. So if you're in the UK or Europe, if you keep an ear on those two frequencies when the Hurricane Watch nets are active, then you may well hear something, Martin.
Yeah, so as I say, being able to hear, and you are right, top end of 20 metres is often quite quiet, because I think people don't go up there because they don't want to turn the dial on the radio quite so far high. But Ed, do you have hurricanes in Germany, or I know you can have sort of all sorts of interesting weather out there, but what's your thoughts?
Well, not usually. However, interestingly enough, last week there was a documentary on German TV about the increasing number of tornadoes and hurricanes hitting Germany, or in fact, hitting Europe in general. So at the moment, no, we don't get that many. However, the tendency is that it's likely to increase. So any sort of warning of that is good. We'd probably do it through a satellite or something rather than having a set of radio stations around. But since the Hurricane Watch net started 60 years ago, there were no satellites. It's an interesting story, this one, with the 60 years of service, and there's been 156 landfalling hurricanes, of which 60 were major, category 3 or stronger. And the volunteers involved in this event, there are 60 of them. So 60, 60 and 60. So, yeah, interesting fact there. And good luck to the guys there. And as Caryn already touched on, with the US government reducing funding to this kind of warning services, or other warning services, I should really say, the volunteer service becomes even more important over the next 60 years. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, as I say, it's a lot going on and we wish them success. And I'm going to stay with you, Ed, because this is really part of the same story, very close to part of the same story. But resilience in amateur radio for National Preparedness Month 2025. So it's all about preparing, isn't it?
Yeah, and this one really, this text here, you probably want to give to one of our US correspondents, because this is all about National Preparedness Month, is September in the US. Not sure if we have one in Europe, and if we do, it's I'm pretty sure it's not September. But yeah, I mean, being prepared, the old Scout motto, be prepared. It's true as much today as it has been for the last 100 years. But yeah, Martin, please pass this to one of our US correspondents for more detailed discussion.
Yeah, no problems, Ed. Well, I'm going to ask Caryn her opinion on it now. Preparedness Month. What do you think?
Oh, I think preparedness should really be year-round. I think Preparedness Month is a good way to focus readiness. It's a good way to assess your station and make sure all the parts of your station, particularly portable, off-the-grid communication, is in working order, although we know equipment can certainly spring some surprises on us if we think it's working and it's not. But I think the observing the month is a good way to just put a focus on making a check of everything you have. But frankly, every year should be preparedness year. With the way the weather has been changing, with the way natural disasters have been occurring more frequently, you have to be prepared. If you don't have a go kit, in a pinch, you use your POTUS station. Whatever you have that enables you to get out and communicate, by all means. Don't be caught by surprise. And this includes too your own personal property, important paperwork, documents. They always say have waterproof containers for things like the deeds to your home and any other things. Be prepared at all levels, not just as a radio operator, but in any way possible to ensure that you can survive. Back in the day when we worried about another world war, not that we don't now, but back in the day I can remember some people building bunkers in their homes. Not saying do that, but definitely be aware that the world is changing and you really need to step up your game. And this is a wonderful, wonderful reminder. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, no problems at all, Caryn, and you are right. We need to be a bit more prepared. If you can't get out from your house for some reason, it could be bad weather, it could be a whole raft of things. We shouldn't just be going from hand to mouth all the time. And I know everybody these days wants it yesterday, and I ordered it today and I want it tomorrow. I ordered it first thing in the morning. I expect to get it by the evening. We can't rely on this. We've got to be more prepared. Dan, what's your thoughts?
Well, I'll just echo Caryn's thoughts here. Whenever I tell people I'm a ham radio operator, a lot of times they'll say, "Oh, well, we're gonna rely on you when the big one hits," and I don't know that I'm quite that prepared. Although I do have a solar panel and some batteries, and probably could cobble together some emergency communications. Yeah, I think that's sort of one of the things that goes along with being a ham radio operator.
Yeah, it certainly does, Dan. Certainly does. And, even if you've only got a handy talkie, that's certainly going to give you a bit of preparedness. Edmund, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, we don't, as far as I can see, have a direct equivalent of Preparedness Month in the UK. There is a section on the gov.uk website that gives hints and tips about how to be prepared. That's at gov.uk/prepare. Mentioning this kind of thing, incidentally, not directly amateur radio related, but on the same day that this podcast is released, Sunday the 7th of September, at around 3 o'clock UK time, there is going to be the second test of nationwide of the mobile phone alert system. So if everything works properly, around 3 p.m, your phone should make a siren-like noise for about 10 seconds, and you should get a message saying this is just a test, please ignore. We did the first test a couple of years back, and a small minority of people, me being one of them, didn't actually receive anything at all. So I'll be interested to see this year if I do get the alert, although I'm using a different phone now, so it's not a like-for-like comparison. As far as radio communications go, yeah, even if you've got a handy talkie, make sure that you charge the battery periodically, because there are some types out there, types of radios that will drain the battery. They have a quiescent current over a long period of time, so you could not turn your handy talkie on for about 3 months and then turn it on in anger, thinking that you've got a fully charged battery, and in reality you haven't. My Woushans and Yaesus tend to do that, whereas the much maligned but cheap and cheerful Baofeng UV5R doesn't. It's got when you turn it on and off, it makes a proper click and it completely disconnects the battery, I think. So I haven't had that problem with those. So make sure your batteries are topped up, and also it's worth having a listen round the 2 meter band and becoming familiar with where activity lives in your particular location. You'll often find that in any given town or city, many local amateurs monitor a spot frequency on the 2 meter band instead of or as well as the national calling channel. So it's well worth knowing what that is in your location, just in case the worst ever did happen and you tried calling for help on what's it in the States, 146.520 or 145.500 in the UK and most of Europe. And if you didn't get an answer on the calling channel, if you know where the locals are likely to be hanging out, then you've got a second frequency in reserve that you could use for trying to summon help. Back to you, Martin.
Edmund, if I can just jump in there, what date was that test in the UK?
Sunday the 7th of September, the day the podcast was released.
Right. Okay. In Germany, it's on the 11th at 11 a.m. So there'll be sirens and smartphone tones and even some pages that are still around going off over here. So same idea. It's done annually here, and the first time they did it, they had about 50% of the people didn't get them. Last year, they were up to 90%, so they're hoping it's going to be over 90% this year as well. And interestingly enough, the EU website mentions as emergencies, not just weather emergencies, not military, not political, military-generated emergencies, but also health. So they intend to use the emergency system also to warn of epidemics and pandemics like COVID, if we get the next COVID coming through. So, yeah, be prepared.
Yeah, sounds interesting, Ed. And in fairness, I didn't get the alert last time it happened in the UK. I've still got the same phone because I very rarely change my phone. It's the truthful answer. Probably ought to, but I just use a phone as a phone most of the time anyway. But yeah, interesting. Now, also, Hams help Sonoma Spring residents with GMRS. So, yeah, we can do normal frequencies, amateur frequencies, but in the States you got GMRS, and you probably need to correct me on this, but I'm sure some of the GMRS frequencies are license free, and the others you have to have a license for, depending on what power level you run. Is that correct, Dan?
Well, GMRS, you pay, I forget what the fee is, but you do have to pay a licensing fee to do GMRS, and I don't think it's dependent on the output power. There's certain output power restrictions for GMRS.
All right. So I know I looked at frequencies when I came over last year, but I couldn't remember, and we didn't have GMRS anyway. So, but
I think Dan will confirm it's actually FRS that's license free and GMRS is licensed.
Correct. You're correct. Yeah. And they use, and the confusing thing is they use some of the same frequencies. Some of the channels are it's channelized. Some of the channels are common channel.
That's where I got the mix up, Dan. Yeah, that's where I got the mix up.
And FRS, Family Radio Service, is limited in power. GMRS is limited too, but it's like, I don't know, 50 watts or 100 watts.
Right. So I thought, I know one was 5 watts and one was a lot more. So, yeah.
Right.
There you go. So, yeah, let's say all radio is good radio. You just got to make sure that you've got the right system for the people who are using. Now, if you haven't got people who've passed their test, then GMRS could be a very good way of doing this. If people want to go out and just get a radio and buy the license, and hopefully the hams will show them how to use the radio properly. Caryn, what's your thoughts?
Well, that is exactly what is going on in Sonoma County, Martin. The hams are teaching local residents how to use GMRS, and some of the hams themselves have GMRS radios, and they monitor these frequencies, and they have in the community, they basically give everybody a way of coordinating with one another and integrate them into a broader emergency communication system. So it's different layers of different types of radio, and GMRS is part of that. This is an ongoing program. You want to talk about preparedness, being prepared. This is the second year of the 3-year program that's been going on in Sonoma Springs, California. And this has been, of all things, a federal grant. Thank goodness there is money for this. And that purchases the radios and gets I believe it also covers the fee for the licenses. So that's good. This is a tough area to live in. They are classified as an evacuation zone when there are wildfires. And I think globally, the news carries word of how badly California is affected, some parts of California, of these wildfires. So this is important for the people who have these radios to know what's going on and if indeed they have to evacuate. So there will be probably another session, since this is a 3-year program, so we can look forward to hearing about more people getting their radios, getting their licenses for GMRS next year. And so it goes. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, that sounds sensible on that one, and things good. Ed, do you want to comment on this one?
Just to expand a little bit, that we've had several stories over the last year, actually, of networks being set up with GMRS and sometimes with FRS as well. And quite often the technical centres or the coordination points have been radio amateurs, having the technical skills to then teach others how to operate the GMRS radios or FRS radios in a way that in an emergency doesn't become a panic, it becomes a situation where the person knows, okay, something's going on, I need help, or something's going on, what's going on, can I help? And by having a structure of your FRS and GMRS radios with, shall we say, the normal public, talking to an amateur radio operator who has GMRS and possibly FRS and is sat perhaps in the fire brigade station or the emergency control centre, is able to take those messages, filter them and pass them on in a format that then the real emergency services can take an action. And that kind of structure is a good example of where amateur radio, with our skills and with our training of message handling, becomes of value to a community. Some of these groups have become great friends as well, as in there's been, I think I remember one from about 2 or 3 months ago of a community of people that, shall we say, are in the older age group, and the added security they feel just through an occasional chat with somebody over their FRS or GMRS radio on a scheduled night once a week or whenever, it just gives them more feeling of not being alone. So, you know, a lot of what we learnt during COVID of amateur radio helping people not be alone and not feel alone is true in all these little communes and these little groups where use of GMRS and FRS along with amateur radio, along with the existing links from the amateur radio group to the emergency services, just put something in place that gives everybody confidence so that, you know, if something bad should happen, hopefully everybody knows what to do. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, good comment on that. And I remember a few years back, Mrs. B and my daughter went to Ireland, went over to see Colin, and I was left on my own. And Carol said to me, "Are you going to be all right? You're going to be lonely?" And I picked up the hand mic for my radio with one of these, "Dear, you're never lonely." You know, there's always somebody who will talk to you, which is a good thing. So I can understand what you're saying about allowing people to chat to each other as well. Edmund, this FRS is very similar to what we call 446 in the UK. And I know you do a bit of 446 at times, but what do you think about the preparedness and teaching people to use them properly?
Absolutely, because I've seen people who don't normally use PMR 446 radios. Somebody a good few years ago, I was at an event and they were holding it as if it was a mobile phone and didn't understand the concept of only one person being able to speak and transmit at a time. I've seen people hold handhelds with the back of the radio facing their mouth and their head, so the microphone facing away. So I'm all for education and training people how to use equipment like that. Yes, as far as PMR 446 is concerned, FRS, the family radio service, as I understand it, is the direct equivalent, except that there are more frequencies available, and latterly you're allowed to transmit on some of them, but not all, at a maximum of 2 watts as opposed to 500 milliwatts. And then parallel to that, you've got GMRS, is it General Mobile Radio Service? And there are more channels available in GMRS, but you need a license to transmit. And the GMRS frequencies overlap the FRS frequencies and have extra ones that are GMRS only, which means you can have repeaters on the GMRS frequencies. And the thing that dictates which service you are using is mostly the power. So conceivably, you could transmit quite legally on a particular frequency using an FRS handheld, and then put that down and then pick up a higher power handheld that was over 2 watts, transmit on the same frequency but at higher power, and you would then come under the aegis of GMRS and you would need a license. when we visited the US to go to Dayton and then Chicago back in 2019, I did program in some of the GMRS repeater frequencies. Obviously, it would have been completely illegal for me to transmit, and I didn't do it. But for listening, I had them programmed in my handheld, and I did hear some conversations going on some of the GMRS repeaters around the Chicago area. And maybe I got very lucky, because as with any radio service, you'll always have idiots who'll abuse it and swear and say things they shouldn't and all that. So maybe I got lucky, but the conversations I heard on GMRS could have quite happily passed as amateur conversations on amateur frequencies with call signs, obviously. So I think it's a very good service that could be used for this kind of thing, and it's just a shame that we don't have anything directly comparable in the UK. Probably the closest thing we've got is what I know as the UK general frequencies, which I think are called UK Simple Light or something like that these days, where you have a selection of frequencies at VHF and UHF, and you have to pay however many tens of pounds it is for a 5-year license. No exams needed, but with those, it's all simplex and it's all limited to handheld equipment, as I understand it. So that would be 5 watts maximum, wouldn't it? But yeah, glad to hear that GMRS is potentially being used to make some good things happen, Martin.
Yeah, that is good news. Good news. So we've rather rolled those 3 together, and hopefully you guys got something out of it. This is a feel-good story. I'm going to pass it to you first, Ed, because it talks about Australia, but a radio homecoming 1 century later down there in Australia, in Victoria. Say first YL, I believe, in Australia. But Ed, I'm going to let you go first.
In Australia, there's a amateur radio group called YLARA, or YLARA, Young Ladies Amateur Radio Association. So it's the equivalent of in the UK BILARA, and I'm not sure what the one in the US is, but there's one in most major countries. And they've got a contest coming up. Sorry, it's not YLARA, it's ALARA, sorry. They've got a contest coming up, and as it turns out, the first female radio amateur licensed within the state of Victoria in Australia was a lady called Elizabeth Hutchins. She had the call VK3HM, and she lived in a house that was called, I've got it here, Avon, by Bryn Avon. And it just turns out that house has been on the market, and a Australian radio amateur bought it without realising it had the history. And so he's actually, now I'm just trying to see his name in here, but I can't see it immediately. But anyway, the story is that he's now found out through one of the amateur radio historians in Australia, and because of that, he's going to actually put on a station during the Young Ladies of Australia amateur radio contest, and good luck to him. During that contest, by the way, YLs are allowed to work anybody. The guys are only allowed to work YLs. And so all the details, the link is in the show notes. It's worth just taking a listen, maybe, and I'm just having a look at this actually. Where's the date of the contest? It's not in here. It may be that the contest has already passed, so you'll need to check up on that. But yeah, a nice story of a property that was the start of amateur radio, female amateur radio in Victoria, that is now being bought coincidentally by another radio amateur 100 years later. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, it's a feel-good story, and it's interesting and surprising how many of these events happen or things happen that are interrelated or happen to just fall into place. Edmund, I know you're not a contester, and I know Australia's a bit far away to get contacts, even if you are contesting. But this has got to be an interesting event and an interesting bit of history, isn't it?
History is good, always, but yes, Australia is, given the standard of my antenna setup, shall we say, Australia is rather distant. I don't think I've worked anybody in Australia on voice. I think I've heard Australia on voice, and I've possibly managed to get a few whisper transmissions received over there, but broadly speaking, it's way too far away for me, Martin. But if anybody is taking part in the contest, very best of luck with it, and because it honours or gives a nod to an historical event, I wish the organisers every success.
Yeah, and I'm going to correct you because you said you haven't had a voice contact with anybody in Australia. I'm sure our Phil VK680 is shouting at them at the rate. Yeah.
Yes, via ionospheric propagation rather than down the internet, which isn't real radio anyway. Discuss.
Oh, you.
Well, he said radio, not ham radio.
Yeah. True, Dan. So I'm going to pass it to Caryn next, but lovely story about YLs, isn't it?
This is a wonderful story about YLs, and what's neat is that an OM was at a location that celebrates the first YL in the state of Victoria. Now, the interesting thing here is Jeff Smart, the fellow who got on the air. He did not buy the property, but he made it his QTH for the duration of the contest, which did end. It ended in late August. And gosh, I wish we could find out how he did. That would be wonderful to know exactly whether it brought him a little bit of luck. that he was there on this historically significant parcel for ham radio in Victoria. Jeff knew the property in another context. This is where it gets interesting because we did exchange emails when I was preparing the story for Amateur Radio Newsline. Bryn Avon was a property he knew in his professional work. He does has a commercial consultancy and had been on the property for some reason. He didn't specify what it was, but he was familiar with the property. And he then learned its significance in amateur radio after reading an article by Jennifer Wardrop, VK3WQ. She wrote an article, I believe, in an Alara publication. And, well, he said, that's it. I'm operating. I want to see if I can operate from here. And contacted the property owner. And the property owner said, well, there's a shack that's still here. If you want to operate from the shack or near the shack, sure, you're free to do that. So it just is, as you say, Martin, it is very much a feel-good story because it's a nod to history. It brings life full circle, especially because it's been 100 years. This is a 100th year for the licensing of Elizabeth Hutchings, VK3HM. What a celebration. If she's up there in the ionosphere and was looking down on the contest, I'm hoping she had a big grin on her face and maybe a little bit of influence in the propagation to help Jeff VK3GCM achieve a good score in that contest. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, it's a great, nice, fun story. And yeah, bringing the history back, it's all too easy to not know about this. I didn't know about this particular one, but the more I stay in amateur radio, the more history I learn. I wasn't interested in history when I was at school. I couldn't care how many wives Henry VIII had or whatever at the time, but these things are more relevant to us because I'm into the hobby. So, good one. Dan, have we left you anything to say on this one?
Well, I think the only thing I have to say is to echo Edmund's comment that history is good.
Oh yeah, it's worth doing, and as I said, There's a lot of things we learn, which is what our hobby's about. It's always changing, and you always find out more bits and pieces as you go along. And sometimes the history, what you think is correct because you've heard it in your country, doesn't necessarily mean it's right, because other countries might have had a parallel goings on at the time, or might have beaten your people that had the big promotion in your own country. So interesting stuff. Right, Caryn, you put this one in. A ocean washes away almost all a de-expeditioner's equipment. Now, that's a worry, but it sounds a safety issue to me that, somebody's equipment's been washed away. Would you like to go first on this one?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Martin. This is a story we're covering in Amateur Radio Newsline, and I confess, I cringed. I really cringed when I wrote this up for the newscast, talking about a generator, IC7000, 7 bandpass filters, 2 multi-band antennas, a 500-watt amplifier, and a destroyed or severely damaged Yagi that did not get washed overseas. This was the 3G1P Iota expedition to the rocks off the coast of Chile. 3 guys working very hard to make contacts. This was mainly for Iota. And they were in touch with the Chilean Coast Guard because they wanted to keep an eye on the ocean swells. And if it got to be a little too hazardous for those rocks, they were going to have to be evacuated. This was in late August. And indeed, that's just what happened. So the guys, after I think it was 3 days, had to head off the rock. I believe they even had to swim through the water to get to the rescuing boats. So this was not an easy evacuation to begin with. Conditions were already pretty hazardous. And as they left the rock, they looked at the equipment, which they had secured very nicely, with an eye toward coming back and getting it after the situation had calmed down. Looking at their blog on their website, in bold letters, the headline they put at the top of the post said, "Very bad." And the quote they had beyond that was, "There's absolutely nothing there except for the beam antenna that we left anchored, which has been damaged." Their ultimate conclusion is that the sea pretty much claimed everything and swept over the rock. All right, so 2 thoughts here. Of course, this is wonderful equipment, some of which was their own personal property. So they've suffered some personal losses here. But the reminder here is that, these guys themselves were in danger, right? They had to be evacuated. And it's really, really important to appreciate and to understand the risks that so many of these operators take when they go out and they do these things. Yes, they're adventurers, and yes, many of them are well prepared for the hazards of going where they're going. They're doing it partly for themselves because it's a challenge, but it's important to remember they're doing it for us, even and to hear some of the behavior of the people calling them on the air when in fact everybody should give everybody a chance to have a contact. They're doing it because this is what they do. And it's a great, expensive venture. Loss of equipment, yes, you can replace equipment. You can't replace lives, so you save the lives first. But I thought that this story was a really good reminder of what it's all about. I'm sure these guys will be out there again at some point in another place, maybe even go back to the rocks at a different time. But it's worth noting they certainly deserve our support, our encouragement, and most importantly, our respect. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, you make some great points there. And even if, say, we go and do a Parks on the Air or whatever, we've got a fair amount of equipment with us. cost-wise that you wouldn't want to lose. But these poor guys had no chance if they had to evacuate quickly, and they've lost a lot of gear. That's a lot of money. And as you say, trying to do it for our benefit as well. Dan, what's your thoughts on this the expedition?
Well, really, it is a shame that they lost all their equipment. But, I think these fellows knew the risks they were taking. And, unfortunately, they got the short end of the stick on that. That hopefully the amateur radio community will step up and kind of give them some support. But, yeah, they knew the risk. We have a fellow here in our club who's going to be on the next Bouvet Island de-expedition. And he was telling us all of the things that go into it, and it's quite a big commitment for the people that go on these expeditions. So I think they probably knew what they were getting into, and unfortunately, luck wasn't with them this time.
No, the risks were too great this time, which was a shame. But at least they, as Caryn said, quite rightly said, life is more important. Equipment can be replaced. So that was a good one on that. Ed, we've both met Emil. He's one of these guys who does a lot of de-expeditions, and when he did Rockall a couple of years ago, that would have scared the hell out of me trying to do that one. What do you think of these guys?
Yeah, they are adventurers, or at least some of them are. It depends on the de-expedition. To some of these really remote subantarctic islands and such, they're all adventurers and they're all super fit, and they are all hopefully as well prepared for the risks as they can be, but there can always be things that go wrong. In this case, I think one thing we should also highlight, not that they could have done anything about it, but all that equipment that's gone in the sea has polluted the sea, which is something we shouldn't be doing these days. Yeah, you could probably say compared to what gets thrown off ships at sea, it's nothing, but it's still, I think we should make the point. All of that needs to be planned into the planning behind a de-expedition. What happens if? Plan for the worst, and if it happens, everything is planned. If it doesn't happen, good, you're lucky. As always, life first, or stay away of, reduce the possibility of injuries. But even then, after that, you need to be looking after nature as well. These guys were unlucky. They knew what they were going into. They were lucky that they got out without any physical injuries, and that's the only thing that counts, really. The equipment they lost, it's a shame. Hopefully some of the more wealthy members of our community might help them out. But I suspect some of these people going on de-expeditions, they have to be fairly wealthy themselves normally in any case, because the challenging de-expeditions cost a lot of money to put on. And as we've mentioned, the actual action on the island itself is nothing compared to the planning and logistics before it. And the money raising, and these are major operations. This one might not have been one of the largest, but it certainly would have taken a lot of preparation. And I suspect the members of the expedition team were more upset that they couldn't have stayed a few more days on the island rather than the loss of the hardware, the loss of the equipment. I think they would have been much happier with being able to stay on the island for the full term, and if everything had gone fine. It didn't, but the major point, again, we keep coming back to it, there was no injuries, there was no loss of life, and in my book, that's a success. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, certainly is, Ed. Edmund, have we left you anything to say on this one?
Not really. I can only echo what's been said already, which is that, yes, I understand that it must be galling to have lost all of that equipment, particularly if some of the items belong to individuals rather than the group as a whole. But every single item that's been lost to the sea can be replaced. You can't replace even one human life. So that's the important thing. And things can and do go wrong, and that is so with anything in life, and especially with something relatively risky such as a de-expedition like this. And if you weren't ever prepared to do things that could go wrong, then you, I guess, wouldn't do anything at all. So I'm sorry that this has happened, but I hope that the disappointment, sadness, regret, whichever words you want to use, will be more than offset by previous successful de-expeditions and future successful ones.
Yeah, I think you're right. And as I say, the important thing was no loss of life. But equipment can be replaced. So it's an interesting story. Last news story, and this one's NASA is seeking volunteers to track the Orion spacecraft in 2026, and they're looking to amateurs. Can they help? And I suppose because we've got a lot of amateurs worldwide, and space is something that most of us get all excited about. Even today, it's something that people would probably want to get involved with, and NASA must have respect for us because they wouldn't be asking amateurs to do it if they didn't have the respect for us. Now, I know this is probably not your bag, Edmund, but what do you think?
Well, I think it's a bit beyond me technically. Is it, when we use the word amateurs, are we referring to amateur radio people or amateur astronomers, for example?
My belief is amateur radio people.
Okay, fair enough. Because the downlink is going to be up in the microwave frequencies, 2.2 to 2.29 gigahertz. I'm not sure offhand if that coincides with an amateur band or not, but the equipment that you would need to use to track this, I think, would be rather specialised and complex. I mean, how would you use a dish with a not just side to side but up and down motor on it to track it across the sky, or what? I don't know, Martin. That the science and frequency of this are a bit above me, to be honest.
Okay, but you've made some valid points. You're going to be up in the microwaves to receive this, so this won't be for everybody. There are people around that possibly would do it, and if it's just receiving the information, there's a fair chance that some of these SDR receivers now are getting up to almost 3 gigs, so could be interesting there. Dan, what's your thoughts on this one?
As Ed pointed out earlier, we have a group called SatNogs, which is sort of in the business of tracking satellites, and they should certainly be interested in this project. And I would think that a lot of hams would be, like you say, SDRs now cover that range. So really all you need is antennas. And the SatNogs folks have tracking antenna systems. So I would hope that SatNog sees a big boost in their membership of people wanting to build these satellite tracking systems. Like you say, NASA is soliciting radio amateurs to help them out. I think a lot of us should, and we have a history. Talk about history. We have a history of that, right? The first satellite, Sputnik, was tracked by hams in the 15-meter band. So overall, I think this is a good thing for everybody.
I think you're right, Dan. I do think you're right, and it does keep us involved. Caryn, what's your thoughts on this one?
Okay, well, the only thing I have to add really is this is passive tracking, so anybody with a receiver or an SDR, I'm sure if it's capable, can do this. Anyone with an interest, I suspect that this will be popular in university environments. I think the academic community will jump on this. Certainly in the ham community, we've got enough space nerds who are going to love this. I mean, it's a natural pairing, I think. So I'm hoping that NASA will get a really robust response. And I should add, this mission, the Artemis mission that they're talking about, or the Orion spacecraft, is going to be at this point in the spring of 2026. So this is not something that's happening this year, but they're asking volunteers to contact NASA, and I believe we will be putting the link in our show notes. Contact NASA and let them know, and they've set a deadline. They've set a deadline of October 27th to let NASA know if you wish to participate. So they'll be looking at the Doppler shift and the S-band and a number of other things, which I think is all available on the website that we will be posting. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, I think it'll be an interesting one. And I'll see what else I'm doing. I'm not promising, but I quite fancy this one myself. Ed, have we left you anything to say on this?
Yeah, I'll just expand and answer a couple of points that Edmund raised. This is just below the 13 centimetre amateur band. Okay, so 2200 to 2290 megahertz, or 2.2 to 2.29 gigahertz. Our band starts at 2.3. So a 13 centimetre amateur band antenna would work for this. It can be a beam, a Yagi. It can be a dish if you prefer. Those that operate currently QO100 already have the equipment. In fact, they have the transmit equipment as well as the receive. So this, from a technical point of view, is not a difficult one to crack. As Dan has already mentioned, SatNogs have actually a design for a home-built azimuth and elevation rotator system for tracking any satellite. And there are also commercial ones around for people who prefer to buy than build. And yeah, SatNogs is the place that NASA should be knocking on the door of already. If they haven't, then they probably need to do their research better. SatNogs already has a worldwide network. It's been going for nearly 10 years. It's gathering data from multiple satellites that are orbiting the Earth. And most importantly, that data is being fed back to a central point where it is stored and can be analysed and extracted. If NASA get, let's say, 500,000 amateurs all individually applying and say, yeah, I can do it from, let's say, north of New York. I can do this from London, etc., etc. Where's the coordination of the data coming in? And NASA's going to have to put together, well, they may already have done so, but they'd have to have a computer system put together to store and coordinate. For SatNogs, that's all already in place as far as I know. I put the link to the SatNog open source global network into the show notes, and they would seem the ideal fit for what NASA is looking for. Recently, several Spanish amateur radio enthusiasts have helped with telemetry for Chinese satellite and moon mission operations. So, amateur radio helping space organizations is not unusual. In India, there are also amateurs involved in the space organizations. So there is a real, not a parallel, but there's an involvement from amateur radio in space research. And actually, there always has been. So I wish NASA luck with this. And I presume somebody from SatNogs will have already contacted NASA and said, give us the details and we can probably deliver faster using our own systems that are already in place rather than you having to build something from scratch. We'll wait and see what comes upon this. It might be a nice one to cover in a future edition of ICQ podcast. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, I think it's a positive one, and we'll keep a monitor on this one, which is a good one. But that concludes the news stories. And we'll now find out what the guys have been up to. And this group, we always go ladies first, don't we, Caryn? So what have you been up to since the last time you were on the podcast?
Okay. Yeah, bunch of things. Before I get into that, I just want to acknowledge, I know we had talked about this before the show, before we began with our discussion, a Silent Key, a Marcus Bosler, a DL6Y YM of the very, very popular Bomatech Precision CW keys has become a silent key. I just want to acknowledge that. Another loss to the CW community, and apparently an awfully nice guy, very popular CW operator and QRP operator. So I did want to mention that. Regarding what I'm up to, well, I think at the beginning of our roundtable, I thought I heard Ed bark. I thought I heard a woof woof from him, if I'm not mistaken. We just finished our International Dog Day activation. We had a great time. Here on this side of the pond, we operated as Kilo 2 Delta, CW and sideband. Heard a lot of incredible stories from people, some who no longer have dogs but wanted to be a part of this call to action for responsible animal stewardship. Some who had some funny stories, a few who had their dogs in the shack with them. Kilo 2 Delta, that call sign now sunsets with us for this year. We have formed Dog Day Radio Amateur Radio Club. The call sign is Kilo 0 DOG. And we will be going on the air next year and hopefully in years to come as Kilo 0 DOG, the Dog Day Radio Amateur Radio Club activators for International Dog Day, and perhaps, just perhaps, one or two interim events. So that's pretty exciting. We had an amazing team. If any of our team members are listening, thank you for putting your heart into this and being part of the international team, which is great. POTA. Conditions improved enough that I got out. I did 2 POTAs in a row on the weekend. The first POTA was with the 891, and the second POTA, I took my KX2 out with the POTA 33 mast and the pack antenna and fed random wire. And that was just delightful. I didn't go for big numbers. I only really activate for about an hour and a half at most. But I got enough for an activation and went to a beautiful state forest to do so. What's really nice is sometimes you do get to meet members of the public. And I was setting up, and it was a little interesting for me because I was in a different kind of soil at this state forest. It was much looser, and it did not support the spike that I use for the mast. And so after I'd gotten everything set up, I turned my back to take care of the radio, and of course a slight breeze came along, and we know what happened to the mast and the fully deployed mast and the antenna. So at that point, I just picked everything up and got it better situated, and it was fine after that. But two people who were nearby were watching, and the woman said to me, called out to me and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I said, "I'm not sure." She says, "Well, you look like you're doing some kind of science experiment." And I said, "Well, in a way, I am. I'm experimenting with radio waves." I said, "But a few moments ago, if you saw what happened, I was also experimenting with gravity, and it appears gravity won." So it was kind of fun, though, being able to explain what POTA is about, what amateur radio is about, and of course, in my case, the use of Morse code to make the contacts. It was a great, great morning. I had a great time, reminded me of why I love getting out there so much. And that's pretty much it. Now we go back to planning next year's International Dog Day. Back to you.
Well, it sounds like you've had a lot of fun, Caryn, which is what it's all about. The hobby has to be fun. If you don't enjoy it, we don't do it. Dan, what have you been up to since the last time we spoke? You were away. Didn't make the last episode, did you?
What I was doing, the reason I missed was because I was making my annual trek to DEF CON in Las Vegas to teach a class to hackers out there. And I'm very happy to report that 32 people in the class, and 32 people passed the test. So I'm very happy about that. It was a really good class, and they all seemed really hot to get going in amateur radio. And DEF CON, of course, was phenomenal too. I mean, it's quite a conference. In fact, I wrote a blog post about that, whether or not ham radio needs something like DEF CON. If anyone's interested in that, maybe they can take a look at my blog. Unfortunately, I was supposed to teach another class the next weekend in New York City, but brought home some kind of virus with me, and I was just really sick for the next week. And I had to cancel the New York trip. Good thing about that, though, is the folks that were there from the Ham Radio Village stepped up and taught the class, and they had some great results. So, that's a really good thing, because now they won't need to rely on me to travel all over the place to teach these classes. They can see that they don't need me to do it. In other words, the only other thing I'll report on is POTA, and like Caryn says, one of the great things about POTA is the people that walk by and come by and talk to you. I had one woman walk by, and she said she sort of knew what we were doing, but kind of not. I said ham radio, and she said, "Oh, my dad was K3QJT," and we had a nice talk about ham radio. And just Monday, I was out at my favorite park, and I made my 2,000th contact at that park. So I've got a double kilo from that park now. And one of the fellows that stopped by to talk to me, his call sign was Kilo Delta 8 ZQZ. So think about that on CW. Not a great CW call sign. But I had a lot of fun, and like I said, I'm over the 2,000 mark there at that park. So yeah, that's about all I'll report on today.
Well, at least you had some fun, and 23 out of 23 is good, Dan.
32 out of 32.
Well, maths was never my high point, Dan. Oh dear. Am I safe to be let out on my own?
You're taking some credit away from me.
I don't mean to, Dan. I honestly don't mean to. There you go. Ed, what have you been up to since last time we spoke?
Well, I'll echo the comments about International Dog Day. I got on during the month a few times as DL0DOG, and I'd like to thank all the people who called, if they're listening here. I know one of them definitely was, and that's Ewan, Mike 0 Victor India Kilo, who actually worked me on the 26th when I was out in a POTA park. The 26th is the actual dog day, so I thought I'd go out and do both in one go. And he was putting a booming signal down here into southern Germany from up in Scotland. Another shout out to another person who worked me, but not while I was operating DL0 Dog, but also commented on how much he enjoyed listening to ICQPodcast, is Stefan, SM5YRA, Sugar Mike 5 Yankee Radio Alpha. So to Stefan, and also to Ewan, thanks for listening to the podcast, and thanks for the contacts. Yeah, apart from International Dog Day, I actually managed to get away for 4 days from home, and of course I managed to get in a HEMA, POTA and SOTA activations, and a little bit of sightseeing over on the French border from Germany, and enjoyed that. Other things I've just been doing in the last couple of days is I've been deeply engrossed in a website that a friend of mine here in Germany, I've mentioned before. It's Rob DM1CM. The website is portable-antennas.com, and it's a website where there are a lot of wire antenna designing formulas and calculators and everything else, and he's just been doing a major upgrade to that. There's more antennas there, and also he's expanded the section where it actually explains to you how antennas actually work, and also how the modeling tools work and what they show and what it means. So really a fantastic free resource for all radio amateurs. And as I'm still reading through some of the technical side of that, and it's a bit above me, but slowly but surely a bit more sinks in. But the actual tools for calculating lengths you need for building your wire antennas, that's straightforward. It's just if you want to know the background. So again, that's portable-antennas.com. And yeah, apart from that, a little bit of construction, and that's about it since last time we were on the ICQ podcast. We're just starting to go into autumn here now in southern Germany, so I might get a couple more either SOTA or POTA activations in before the snow arrives in probably in late November, early December. And so it's a good time to get out and do some portable operating, because we all know that HF bands improve in autumn, don't they? Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, sounds like you've been having fun and all going well there, so that's good. Now, I left Edmund till last because Edmund and I have been out doing some things. I mentioned British Inland Waterways on the air, Edmund, but I didn't give any results, so I didn't want to steal your thunder on that one. And although you were on for International Cat Day for the whole month. You did actually catch me on the talk group as well. So unfortunately, I didn't work one of the dog stations, but as I say, there was a lot going on. So what have you been up to, Evan?
Well, mainly that. Golf Bravo 4 Charlie Alpha Tango was on the air for 28 consecutive days in August. And I managed exactly 250 contacts, which is a lot by my standards, given that I'm a rag chewer, given that I work full-time and have other things going on as well, and given that band conditions were often not the best, shall we say, but quite a few of those contacts came about by me calling CQ on what appeared to be a dead band. 17 meters in particular, these last couple of weeks, often seemed to come alive between about 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock in the evening local time. So even though we're now a week or two further down the line, it might be worth trying it on that band. And I didn't have a resonant antenna up at the time. I used my 20 meter dipole with a bit of persuasion through an antenna matching unit and called CQ on 17 meters when it looked like nobody else was on there. And after a couple of calls, I was called by a station in Brazil. Other highlights included working W1AW, the ARRL station, on 15 meters, using my 40 meter dipole, which goes quite nicely as a 3/2 wavelengths antenna. And I also ended up with quite a few contacts on 2 meters FM. And if you monitor that frequency for hours and hours and hours, you can often hear nobody at all. But then if you put a call out yourself, it's surprising how often somebody will come back to you. So, yeah, GB4 Cat was quite successful overall. Took part in British Inland Waterways on the air with Martin from Runnymede next to the River Thames on the August bank holiday weekend. And I'm sure Martin will mention a bit about some of the mishaps we had there. But that day coincided with 433 Alive, so it was nice to get some contacts in the log on 70 centimetres simplex. And we came very close, but didn't quite manage it, to working a station in the US on 15 meters AM. He couldn't quite copy our call sign, but we were using the Zygu G20 at full power, which is 20 watts. So on AM, considerably less than that. And we almost got there. He could copy a few letters, but not quite the whole thing. So that was a highlight. And I'm also looking forward very much this coming weekend to visiting the 2025 National Hamfest at Newark, but unfortunately that will all be over by the time this podcast is released. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah. Well, as I say, it will be, but we keep busy, mate. We keep busy. And you've got a silly o'clock in the morning to get to my place before we go up to Newark. And my favourite route was if you're going very early in the mornings to go through London, and now they've put 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in everywhere. That is a real pain. That's reduced you by, a third your speed you could do, because you could normally do 30, now it's 20 everywhere. Real pain. Takes you longer to get to the motorway. Right. British Inland Waterways, as Edmund said, yeah, we have one or two issues. My Icom IC703 wouldn't power up when I got there. I was using it on the Saturday before. It turned out to be a high resistance power pole connector. Fixed it on the Monday after we came home, so nothing wrong with the radio, just an annoyance. Was that fixed? The Zygo G90, as I said nicely, I don't mean lastly, Edmund moved it about a quarter of an inch and it shut down. And it appeared it had blown the fuse, and I measured it on the field and it appeared blown the fuse. Get home here, remeasure the fuse at the house, perfectly okay. I think in fairness it was a joint on the fuse, but I mentioned a bit more of that in the feature. What else been up to? Family bought me, and I mentioned last time, a QRP Labs QMX Plus. Mine is well on the way to being completed. It just needs configuring and testing and properly and one thing or another, but I've run out of time at the moment. But it is working. It receives. It transmits. The only problem I had was I missed a line in the build manual, which took me about 2 days to find, because I actually fault found the radio back to where the fault, where what you had to do. And in the manual it said, fit this link, which I missed. So my fault. Hans does tell you, read the manual, then reread the manual. And he was dead right. It was my fault. Nothing to do with the QMX. Been talking on the talk group occasionally when there's been people about. I'll be in Ireland next week for a few days, doing some DIY for Colin, but I will be on the talk group as EI M1MRB. The Yaesu FT70D won't allow me to put the slash, a space, or a dash between the EI and the M1MRB, but hopefully when I did a quick test, it did show up as Ireland, so that should help. And what else have I been up to? I've been playing with well, I don't believe they are QRP guys antennas, but I bought a couple of no-tune, end-fed, long-wire antenna devices that you connect to just straight long length of wire on it. They say they are. I think what I paid for them on the Chinese site, I don't think they really are QRP guys. I think they're pirate copies, but we'll have a look and see how it goes. Did end up having to make a reliable 9-volt power supply. Tell you more about it but that was for the QMX Plus. The PA stage is more efficient if you run it off 9 volts rather than 12, and so I've got a little separate 9-volt supply now, which works very well. And as Edmund said, we'll be at the National Hamfest when this is released. I have put stuff out on the internet, so hopefully people will spot us and come and say hi if you've read the internet. So all's left for me to do now is to thank everybody for turning up tonight, and we'll move to the next part of the podcast. I'd like to thank Mr. Dan Romanchik KB6NU.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, great as always, Dan. And as I say, I'm glad you enjoyed your time away last episode. I'd also like to thank Caryn Eve Murray KD2GUT.
Well, it's been great as always, Martin. Always look forward to this.
Yep. And you're about to get a squirrel overdose soon, but that's a joke between you and I, and you understand it. So, yeah. We're also, I'd like to thank Mr. Ed Durrant DD5LP.
Yeah, thanks for the invite, Martin. And for the last time this year, woof woof.
No problems at all. If you want to be a dog, I have no problems with that. I actually like dogs, although I didn't work any dog stations. I'm more of a dog person than a cat person, but I'd never be uncruel to any animal. So there you go. But last but not least, Mr. Edmund Spicer M0MNG.
Thanks for having me on, Martin.
Yeah, great. And I'll see you at stupid o'clock Friday morning when we go to Newark. No problems at all, mate. So 73 all. And we move to the next part of the podcast. 73.
73.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.ICQPodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.ICQPodcast.com.
Now it's time to have a look at the news in brief from me, Colin M6BLY. We start with news here of WRTC, which is of course taking place next year, and the new prime sponsor has been announced, and that to be Yaesu. It's a major commitment from the manufacturer and demonstrates the company's commitment to the recognition and importance of the WRTC program. In addition to financial support, Yaesu have agreed to provide station antenna rotators as well as radio equipment for use at the HQ. So the chairman of WRTC UK, Mark Haynes, Mike 0 Delta X-Ray Romeo, wishes to pass on his thanks to Yaesu for their partnership, and they're excited for the event and working together. So congratulations there on securing that sponsorship. Icom at UK Hamfest have the IC7300 Mark II available for people to look at, and we'll hope to get a look at this. But it's an evolution of their original, the IC7300. And I say there are some enhanced performance with better signals, and some additional ports like a HDMI port for external display, RX connectors for your antennas, and also a built-in CW decoder, amongst many other things. We're going to try and get a look at this at UK Hamfest, and we'll let you know what we are able to find out in the upcoming show. But in the meantime, there's links on ICQPodcast.com for you to check out that latest specs. If you're going or intending to go to the RSGB's convention, their after dinner speaker has been announced. It's Hans Summers, Golf Zero, Uniform Papa Lima. And as I say, he'll be sharing his emotions as he experienced during the 9 months he spent adding SSB to the QMX transceiver. Tickets are still available for this event, so we're going to put a link to this on the ICQ Podcast webpage for you, and I'm sure Hans will have a wonderful enlightening speech to give after the gala dinner there for the RSGB convention. And we finish up with the Exams Standards Committee of the RSGB has announced the publication of an updated version of their Direct to Full Syllabus, information, questions, etc. There's significant changes from the previous versions as they're moving on some points between Section 1 on licensing and Section 2 on operating. Changes bring the Direct to Full Syllabus into line with the latest version of the 3-part syllabus. So we'll pop a link to this for you on the ICQ Podcast webpage. Important to know that these changes come into effect from January. So it's obviously, if you're thinking of taking that exam in 2026, it's very important to check that out. Right, we're going to head over and do our feature this episode, which is a Q&A Plus. As always, hope you enjoy.
And now for this episode's feature from the ICQ Podcast.
Before we start this feature, I made a boo-boo and I want to clear it up before you listen to it and email me. I mentioned hot air gun. I actually had hot air gun on the brain. It should have been a hot air desoldering tool. So wherever you hear hot air gun, I actually meant a hot air desoldering tool or soldering tool. Hi guys, for this episode I wanted to do a Q&A plus a couple of interesting problems I've come across in the last few weeks. My first question that came into the podcast was AI in amateur radio. What do we think? And this came from Dennis M1DLG. Interesting question, Dennis. You've now got me on my soapbox because many, many moons ago, I used to think that what I was told was correct. Now, if I go back to the 1970s, everybody said, don't worry, the computers are going to make your life so much easier. You're not going to do half the things you have to do. Computers will be so much easier. No, it hasn't. We've become slaves to computers and smartphones. Also, they talked about the paperless office. That never happened either. And I'm sorry I'm whinging on my soapbox here, but they used to say, seeing is believing. Well, I can't say that's true anymore. So, what's happening is, there are lots of things out there and people seem to be using more and more AI to do things. Now, I understand that technology moves forward. I'm not that much of a dinosaur. But in fairness, some of the videos I've seen on social media are obviously AI produced. And unfortunately, the more gullible members of society may believe they're true and end up injuring themselves or killing themselves by doing stupid things. Now, that's where I'm going to leave that one. Now, Dennis raised an issue that there is an Austrian station, Oscar Echo 1 Golf Alpha Quebec, and this has been transmitting on 20 metres. It's run by Gerard Artner, and yeah, he's obviously a clever guy and he's trying to do some bits and pieces. But this is where I question it, and Dennis questioned it, and I also questioned this with Edmund when he showed me the site while we were out the other week. Why do I want to talk to a machine? So you call the machine, it repeats your call sign if it understood you, gives you a 5 and 9 and moves on. Well, what's the fun in that? I mean, all right, a contest station, very similar response, but at least the person's in a contest. Doing a 5 and 9 thank you very much to a AI machine sounds stupid. The secondly is we are being plagued with bogus phone calls by computers that appear to be a person until you answer the question completely wrong and then you realise they're not listening. So, in fairness, technology's moving on, but I hope it isn't going to be like this in amateur radio where, we have to talk to a machine and get a 5 and 9, because that to me doesn't feel like amateur radio. I'm sorry, but I thank Dennis M1DLG for raising the issue. I think that was a good one. Now, I also got asked the other day if I would repair a PCB for a gentleman. And he bought the integrated circuit to go onto the PCB. And I looked at it, and in fairness, it was far too small for me to really want to take the job on. The chip was an 8-pin chip, but it was so micro, it was a little bit worrying for me. So I said no onto that one. However, he asked me how to do it, and if it wasn't his, I would have probably, if it was belonged to me, I'd have probably had a go at fixing it. However, if you're going to take chips off of boards when they're surface mount, there's a number of ways you can do it. You can either put loads of solder on the pins and both sides and heat them up and pull the chip off if you're lucky, but that's not always guaranteed because sometimes the chip is soldered underneath as well. So you can see 8 pins, for argument's sake, on the chip I was looking at, but there may be a connection under the chip that you can't see until you turn the chip upside down. Now, because I would have had chips to look at, I could check that out. But if you don't know, you're probably better off taking a surface mount chip off with a hot air gun. Now, you go anywhere near a PCB with a hot air gun, and chances are, if you're not careful, you're going to unsolder half a dozen components around the one you want to actually get. So, you need to make like a heat sink or heat deflector. And you do that with kitchen foil. Cut yourself up some kitchen foil and roll it and flatten it out and make a barrier so that you can put round the device you're desoldering, and that keeps all the heat in that area and doesn't let it out to unsolder other devices. Coming to solder up, well, there's two ways I've seen it done, and both have advantages and disadvantages. If you use your hot air gun, you need to mount your chip in correctly, but normally you put solder paste on the PCB. You then fit your chip onto the pads. Now, at this point in time, I personally would use something non-metallic, like a cocktail stick, blunt the end first, just to hold the chip in place. Once again, use your heatsink deflector, and you heat up, and all the paste will eventually find its way onto the legs of the chip, and it should clear the holes in between, and you should have a good soldered device. Now, that works well if you've got also another pin or connector under the chip. You've obviously got to heat the whole chip up, and the chip will take quite a bit of pressure, heat rather. Now, if you do it with a soldering iron, I've seen people put lots of solder on. I've seen all sorts of bits and pieces. But what you end up doing is you end up with lots of short circuits, and then you end up dragging the solder away from the chip with your soldering iron tip, and eventually you usually end up with clearing the path so that the pins on the chip are not shorted together. So, not a great way of doing it, but I see people do it that way, and it does work if it's the only thing you've got. So that's just a couple of sillies. Now, I had a couple of problems recently. I might have mentioned one of them before. I've had strange fuse problems. Now, I've mentioned before that I had a high resistance fuse. How often do you get high resistance fuses? But some of these manufacturing techniques now are a bit strange. The one that went high resistance was effectively looked like a piece of plastic between the two ends of the fuse, and it looked like the plastic was coated in a metal, and the metal parted as it would do, but I was measuring the resistance to the plastic. So, once again, alright, you're expecting to see a short circuit, but if you're measuring voltage, and you're measuring voltage with a high impedance meter like a digital meter, you see voltage there and you think, oh, the fuse must be okay. Be careful. Now, the other one is, I was out with Edmund the other day. We've been operating for about 5 minutes, and what appeared to be the fuse blew on my Zygo G90. Well, nothing against Edmund, but he moved the Zygo G90 a little bit, and it appeared the fuse blew. I thought, oh God, what's happened there, blah, blah, blah. Replaced the fuse, and the device worked perfectly okay all day. I measured the fuse at the operating location, and it measured open circuit. I brought it home because I wanted an open circuit fuse to do some bits and pieces with. Measured it at home, and it was short circuit, perfectly okay. Put it back in the radio lead, and it worked. Now, I ain't going to be stupid and not do that. What I think was happening with that one is, and I cannot honestly think of any other reason, the fuse looked perfectly manufactured, but I wonder if there was a dry joint on the end, because what happens is the wire from the fuse comes up through the glass, up through the caps that are connected to the glass, and then they solder the ends. And I think that fuse has an intermittent dry joint. on the wire that should be soldered to the metal cap. And that one, you think you're going mad when you spot these problems, but I think that's it. The last thing I'm going to talk about very quickly, I got given some time ago a Bluetooth receiver, or transmitter rather, and the guy said, it doesn't work. And I looked at it and I replaced the battery, and I didn't really know what to do with it, but I replaced the battery and it works perfectly okay. Then I thought, ham radio. With one of these Bluetooth transmitters, if you've got a set of Bluetooth headset, then you've got no physical cable between you and the radio, which is great for safety because it means that if you suddenly get up, you don't pull the radio off the shelf onto the floor or wherever you are. So, might be an idea that these little Bluetooth transmitters that you can buy for literally nothing these days could be a good idea if you've got a Bluetooth headset to connect into ham radio. Now, I hope you found it interesting, but as I say, don't get caught out. Learn from my mistakes. I hope this was of interest.
The ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, serving the amateur ham radio community fortnightly since 2008.
Well, everybody, as always, I really hope you enjoyed this episode's feature. And as I say, as always, there's some bits and pieces in there, I'm sure, that will whet your appetite and, as I say, sort of answer some of your questions along the way. We're recording this episode in the middle of UK Hamfest, so in our next episode we'll have our report from UK Hamfest. If you haven't caught it already, we've got a walk-around video that we've already released to YouTube, so check out the YouTube channel at youtube.com/ICQPodcast. You can check that out there. Couple of bits of feedback, Dad, which we always are grateful for. And the first one comes from Nick, Mike 0 November Tango Victor, and it's in relation to the interview we've done with Hans at Ham Radio 2025 in Freakshire, Hans Summers, on the polar modulation. So, for some reason, I had propagation in my head for some reason, but modulation, as you say. So he says, brilliant. Thanks for doing this, Martin. It's always great to hear Hans talk. There's some real groundbreaking stuff to chew on there. And he said, thanks. That's from Nick.
Yeah, well, I've known Hans before he set up QRP Labs. He did a club talk for us about 25 years ago. And I always find Hans is a very, very nice guy to talk to. I wish I was only half as clever as him because he's a very clever guy, but nice to always talk to him, and he always gives me time when I pull a microphone out. So I think that's a good one, Colin.
Yeah, I think not only is he an extremely clever guy, but you can tell his heart's in the hobby as well, and you add the two together. I mean, he's only for the good of everybody, so I think that's a fantastic one there. Sandip, Echo India 7... India Juliet Bravo, in relation to a few episodes ago, I think episode 448, which was a Did You Know Q&A, and he said, thanks Martin for your features episode. I didn't know that certain resistors could induce inductance. So an interesting bit of feedback.
Yeah, the thing is, nicely, wire-bound resistors are effectively like inductors anyway, and you really, in RF stages, you want carbon composite. If you've got the ones there where they cut a spiral cord into the carbon track, then they can be a little bit inductive. So it's always worth checking. And if you're going to round RF stages, proper carbon composite resistors. But yeah, thanks. I'm glad that you got something from it.
Yep, now we obviously hope you get something from this episode, and you consider us on our value for value support model, just in the same way that Simon Morton, Golf 7 Hotel Charlie Delta, and our monthly and subscription donors have done. So say if you find value from today's episode, just go to our podcast page, ICQPodcast.com/donate, turn that into a monetary figure, and then say whatever you send that way goes towards our running costs and keeping us as a productive and doing this wonderful show for you. So please do consider us. As if you've heard say in today's show that's of value to you, say please do return the value. Now, of course, we'd like to thank Dan, Kilo Bravo 6 November Uniform, Caryn, KD2 Golf Uniform Tango, Edmund, Mike 0, Mike November Golf, and Ed DD5 Lima Papa for taking part in News Roundtable. Many thanks to that, guys. Really do appreciate it. Now, as I mentioned, this show is being recorded in the middle of UK Hamfest, but we will promise we will not open up our new toys and play them until, say, the show is released for you. But we have a very important job, which is to look after Mrs. B this evening, who's been helping us out on our table today. So we need to take her out for a fine dinner and maybe a grape juice or two.
Yeah. And nicely, we need to stop her trying to convince Edmund that it's apple juice and not cider. But that's an in-joke. She did convince him once it was apple juice. He was only drinking apple juice, which is what cider is. It just has an alcohol level.
Yeah, it just makes your eyes go a bit squirrely. That's all it does for there. So the good news is I'm sure in the next few episodes you'll hear about some of the wonderful things that we've seen at UK Hamfest, some of the toys we've been able to treat ourselves to, and as I say, I'm sure there'll be lots of information coming your way from that there. So we're going to bid you guys all 73s continue to enjoy the hobby, and we'll catch you again at a fortnight's time. 73s.
Yeah, 73.